People inside the diner froze when the stranger suddenly slapped the 78-year-old widow across the face. Her spoon dropped, her hands trembled, and fear filled her tired eyes. The entire diner went silent. Chairs scraped, a fork clattered to the floor. No one dared move, because everyone knew this violent man, and everyone feared him. Customers stared in horror, too scared to step in, too stunned to understand why anyone would strike an elderly woman who had done absolutely nothing wrong. The bully stood tall, confident that no one would dare challenge him. He was massive, angry, clearly looking for trouble. But what he didn't know was that she wasn't alone. Seconds later, the diner door swung open. A U.S. Army captain walked in, her son, his uniform still dusted with rain, his expression calm but deadly focused, and beside him, a military K-9 growled low, sensing danger instantly. The bully had no idea who he had just touched. He had no idea what he had just started. What happened next shocked everyone. Stay with us. This amazing story will leave you speechless. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Eleanor Parker had followed the same peaceful routine for years. Every morning at 8, she walked slowly to the small diner on Main Street, leaning gently on the wooden cane her late husband had carved for her. At 78, her steps were slower now, but her spirit stayed warm. The staff knew her name, her favorite seat by the window, and her simple order: 1 cup of tea and 2 buttered toast slices. It wasn't much, but it reminded her of the breakfasts she once shared with her husband before he passed away 7 winters ago. The diner had become her safe place, a corner of the world where she still felt seen. That morning was calm, like any other. A soft drizzle tapped against the windows, blurring the view of the quiet street outside. Eleanor opened her purse and carefully pulled out an old photograph of her family. She did this every morning, just a tiny ritual to make her feel less alone. She smiled faintly, brushing her thumb across the picture of her son, Daniel, her pride and joy. He served as a U.S. Army captain and had been away on duty for months. She missed him dearly, but she never complained. "He's protecting others," she would tell herself. "That's what matters." The smell of fresh coffee filled the air as the waitress, Linda, placed Eleanor's breakfast on the table. "Good morning, sweetheart," Linda said kindly. "Cold out there today, isn't it?" Eleanor nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. She felt grateful for these small moments, grateful that even without her husband, she still had a place where she felt comfortable. She took a slow sip of tea and watched cars glide past the window, unaware of how quickly her peaceful morning was about to change. The diner door jingled, but Eleanor didn't look up. Customers came and went, nothing unusual. But the atmosphere shifted the moment the stranger walked in. His heavy boots thudded on the floor, loud enough to break the soft chatter in the room. A large man with messy hair and a leather jacket, his eyes sharp and restless, scanned the diner as if he was searching for trouble. He muttered something under his breath as he passed a table, causing a young couple to shrink back. Eleanor felt a strange chill but tried to ignore it. She wasn't someone who paid attention to conflict. She simply lowered her eyes and focused on her toast. But the man's shadow grew larger as he moved closer. Without warning, he slid into the booth beside hers, his chair scraping loudly. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her cup. She didn't know him, yet there was something unsettling about the way he glared around as if daring someone to challenge him. The quiet morning she cherished so much was quickly slipping away. The moment the stranger stepped fully inside, the diner's warm atmosphere seemed to shrink. It wasn't just his size or the heavy leather jacket dripping rainwater onto the floor. It was the way he carried himself. His shoulders were tense, his jaw clenched, and his eyes darted around with an anger that didn't belong in a quiet morning diner. Everyone sensed it instantly. Conversations faded mid-sentence. Even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen slowed as if the staff felt danger without seeing it. He marched toward the counter, knocking into a chair on his way. The chair screeched across the floor, and he didn't bother to apologize. "Coffee," he barked at the young waiter, who stiffened at the sudden tone. The waiter nodded quickly, stumbling slightly as he reached for a mug. The stranger watched him with a scowl, as though even the tiniest delay offended him. Eleanor, sitting just a few feet away, tried not to look at him, but she could feel the aggression radiating off of him like heat. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her teacup again. She wasn't afraid easily, yet something about this man made her uneasy. It wasn't his appearance. She'd met all kinds of people in her long life. No, it was something in his eyes. A bitterness. A storm she hoped wouldn't crash into her peaceful morning. The man took his coffee and slammed himself onto the stool beside her booth. Eleanor flinched at the impact. He didn't glance at her, but his body language was loud enough. He was restless, irritated, and ready to take it out on anyone near him. A couple sitting at the far end quietly got up and moved to another table, hoping he wouldn't notice. He did. "The hell are you looking at?" he growled at them. His voice was deep, rough, and meant to intimidate. The couple shook their heads quickly. "Nothing, sir. We're just moving," the husband muttered. The bully smirked, a cruel satisfaction crossing his face. Eleanor kept her eyes on her plate, hoping to stay invisible. But fate wasn't on her side today. The man's gaze shifted, landing on her small frame and gentle presence. For a moment, he studied her with an expression she couldn't read. Annoyance, curiosity, or maybe just the desire to assert control over someone who couldn't fight back. He took a loud sip of his coffee, scraping his boots against the floor as he turned toward her. The uneasy morning was about to take a dangerous turn. Eleanor tried her best to stay quiet, hoping the man would finish his coffee and leave. But trouble has a way of finding the gentlest people. The bully shifted in his seat, glanced at her plate, then leaned closer with a sneer curling on his lips. "You gonna finish that?" he asked, pointing at her half-eaten toast. His voice wasn't curious. It was mocking. Eleanor blinked in confusion, unsure why he was even speaking to her. "Oh, yes, dear," she replied softly. I'm still eating." Her polite tone only seemed to irritate him more. He scoffed loudly. "Figures. Old people always take forever." A few customers glanced over, frowning, but no one moved. The fear in the room was thick enough to feel. Eleanor swallowed hard and looked down, trying to stay calm. She had been through harder days in life, but somehow this moment felt different. The man's presence was overwhelming, like standing near a fire you couldn't put out. She reached for her tea again, hoping the warm cup would steady her trembling fingers. The bully leaned closer until his shadow covered her plate. "Hey," he snapped, "I'm talking to you." She froze. "Yes." "I heard you," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "What's that? Speak up," he barked, pounding his fist lightly on the table. The silverware rattled, and Eleanor flinched so sharply that her cup nearly tipped. The bully smirked as if her fear satisfied something dark inside him. Linda, the waitress, stepped forward courageously. "Sir, please," she said. "She hasn't done anything to you." He turned sharply toward Linda. "Mind your business," he growled, standing halfway from his stool. Linda backed up instantly, her face pale. The man's anger wasn't normal. It was unpredictable, boiling too close to the surface. Eleanor wished she could disappear. Her chest tightened and she clutched her cane under the table. She didn't want a scene. She didn't want attention. All she wanted was her peaceful morning back. But the bully wasn't finished. He pointed at her again. "You think you're better than me, old woman? Sitting here acting all fancy?" Eleanor shook her head quickly. "No, sir. I'm just having breakfast." He laughed, a loud, ugly sound. "Breakfast? You should be in a nursing home, not taking up space here." The diner went silent. Eleanor's eyes glistened, not from anger, but from deep humiliation. She had never been spoken to like this. Not ever. And though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of the storm about to hit that diner. Eleanor's heart pounded in her fragile chest as the bully's insults grew louder. She tried to breathe steadily, but her hands trembled uncontrollably. She had never imagined a simple breakfast would turn into something so frightening. The diners around her watched helplessly, their eyes filled with worry, but fear kept them glued to their seats. No one dared to stand between a dangerous man and an elderly widow. The bully leaned closer until Eleanor could smell the stale odor of alcohol on his breath. His face twisted with anger for reasons she couldn't understand. She didn't know him. She hadn't spoken a harsh word, yet his rage seemed to settle on her like she had somehow offended him simply by existing. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he snarled. Eleanor tried. She truly did. She lifted her eyes, trembling, and whispered, "Sir, please, I don't want any trouble." But her gentle voice only fueled his temper. "No trouble," he barked. "Lady, you're nothing but trouble. Sitting here acting weak. People like you think they get sympathy just because you're old." She shook her head quickly, tears gathering at the edges of her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice cracking. "Please let me finish my breakfast." The words were barely out of her mouth when he suddenly slammed his hand on the table. The plates rattled violently. Eleanor gasped. The sound was so sharp it cut through the entire diner. Every head snapped toward them. "You think you can ignore me?" he roared. Before anyone could react, he reached out with a swift, cruel motion. Slap. The sound echoed across the diner like a gunshot. Eleanor's head jerked to the side. Her glasses flew off and clattered to the floor. Her hand instinctively rose to her cheek as tears spilled out, not just from pain, but from humiliation. In her 78 years of life, she had seen grief, hardship, and loss, but she had never been struck in public. The shock froze her in place. Gasps filled the room. A fork dropped. A child whimpered. Linda, the waitress, covered her mouth in horror. Yet no one moved. The bully stood over her, chest heaving, satisfied with the fear he created. "Maybe now you'll listen," he said darkly. Eleanor looked up slowly, her lip trembling, her voice shaking. Why would you do that?" Her question wasn't angry, it was heartbreaking. A wounded whisper from someone who had lived too long to expect cruelty from strangers. The bully didn't answer. Instead, he puffed out his chest, glancing around the diner as if daring someone to step forward. But the room remained frozen. People wanted to help, but fear chained them to their seats. Eleanor's cheek burned. Her eyes blurred. She felt small, smaller than she had felt in years. She wished her son were here. She wished someone, anyone, would stop this man. And yet none of them knew. Her son was closer than they thought. Closer than the bully could ever imagine. The diner felt frozen after the slap, as if time itself refused to move. Every customer stared at the elderly widow, stunned by the sight of her trembling hands and reddened cheek. The room should have erupted in outrage, but instead, a heavy silence wrapped around everyone. Fear had settled deep into the walls. The bully stood tall, feeding on that silence, his glare daring anyone to challenge him. Near the counter, the young waiter clenched his fists, his breathing shaky. He wanted to say something, anything, but the bully's earlier bark still echoed in his head. He had seen men like this before, men who exploded over nothing. One wrong word, and things could turn deadly. So he lowered his eyes and stepped back, guilt flooding his chest. A family sitting in the corner huddled close together. The father looked torn, shifting in his seat as if trying to gather courage. His wife gripped his arm tightly, whispering, "Don't. Please don't. We have the kids." He hesitated, looking at his two small children staring at Eleanor with wide, frightened eyes. His heart ached, but he stayed seated, silently convincing himself he had no choice. Linda, the waitress, wiped her palms on her apron, shaking from shock. She had known Eleanor for years. She had served her breakfast hundreds of times. Seeing her hurt this way felt unbearable. "Sir, please, stop this," she said softly, but even she couldn't keep the tremor out of her voice. The bully swung his gaze toward her, and she instantly backed away, her courage swallowed by fear. Eleanor, still stunned, slowly reached for her fallen glasses. Her fingers fumbled as she tried to pick them up, the world spinning around her. The shame stung more than the pain. She had lived a long life, full of memories both beautiful and painful, but never had she imagined being struck by a stranger in front of an entire room of people too scared to help. A pair of teenagers whispered from their booth. "Should we call the police?" one murmured. The other shook his head nervously. "What if he sees us? I'm not getting involved." They slid their phones under the table, pretending to scroll as if invisibility could protect them. Every person in the diner felt the same pull. Help her, but don't risk yourself. Protect the old woman, but don't provoke the violent man. The bully smirked through the tension, believing he owned the room. But that illusion was about to shatter. Because someone was only seconds away from walking through that door. Someone the bully should never have messed with. Just as the tension inside the diner reached its breaking point, the front door swung open with a sharp jingle of the bell. The sudden sound sliced through the heavy silence, making every head turn instinctively. Even the bully's smug grin faded for a moment, his attention pulled toward the entrance. Rain blew in with the chilly morning air, and, standing in the doorway, was a man dressed in a crisp military uniform. Boots polished, posture strong, eyes sharp. Behind him trotted a trained military K-9, its alert ears standing tall, scanning the room with disciplined precision. The presence of the two instantly shifted the atmosphere, like a sudden beam of light breaking into a dark room. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Her son. Captain Daniel Parker stood just a few steps inside, rain dripping from his shoulders, unaware of the storm he had just walked into. He had come straight from duty, planning to surprise his mother with breakfast, something he hadn't done in months. He expected smiles, warmth, and his mother's soft voice calling his name. But instead he was greeted by stiff faces, silent fear, and an energy so tense even the dog sensed it. Rex, the K-9, let out a low rumble, not aggressive but alert. The trained dog's eyes locked onto the bully, reading his hostile body language instantly. Daniel paused, confused by the eerie stillness. "Morning," he said politely, but his voice fell flat in the uneasy air. No one answered. People only stared, first at him, then at Eleanor, whose reddened cheek told him everything he needed to know. His heart dropped. In that single moment, Daniel no longer saw the diner he remembered. He saw his mother, hurt, shaken, holding her cane like a shield. He felt the sting in his chest before his mind even caught up. A protective instinct surged through him so fast that even Rex reacted, stepping closer to his side. The bully turned, annoyance flashing in his eyes at the sight of the newcomer. He had no idea who he was looking at. No idea what kind of storm he had just invited onto himself. Daniel didn't move yet, didn't speak. He just stared at the man who had dared to lay a hand on his mother. And the entire diner held its breath. Daniel's boots echoed sharply against the diner floor as he took one slow step forward. Every instinct inside him shifted from calm to alert in a heartbeat. He had spent years in war zones, reading danger before it appeared, but nothing prepared him for seeing his own mother sitting there with a trembling hand and a red mark on her cheek. "Mom?" he said softly, his voice tightening around the single word. Eleanor looked up, and the moment her eyes met his, they filled with tears she had been holding back. "Daniel," she whispered, barely able to speak. Her voice cracked, full of relief and hurt all at once. She tried to smile, but the pain in her face made it impossible. Daniel's jaw clenched. His eyes slowly moved from his mother to the bully standing only a few feet away. The man's posture was still puffed up with arrogance, but Daniel saw it instantly. The slight shift in his weight, the tension in his fingers, the way his eyes darted nervously at Rex, who growled low, sensing hostility. Rex's muscles tightened as he stood between Daniel and the bully, teeth bared just enough to warn without attacking. The entire diner shifted from fear to anticipation. Something was about to happen. "What happened to her?" Daniel asked calmly, but the calmness was deceptive. It carried a cold steel edge that made the bully flinch. No one answered. Not yet. Everyone looked at each other, wondering who would dare speak first. Finally, Linda stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Daniel, she was just having breakfast, and he." Her voice cracked as she looked at Eleanor, then back at the bully. Daniel didn't need the rest. His gaze locked onto the man, sharper than any weapon. "You touched my mother," he said quietly. The bully scoffed, trying to regain his confidence. "Who even are you?" he snapped. "Some guy with a dog?" Daniel didn't blink. "U.S. Army Captain Daniel Parker," he replied, his voice steady, controlled. "And that's Sergeant Rex. I won't ask again. Did you lay a hand on my mother?" The bully's bravado wavered. He hadn't expected that. His eyes flickered around the diner, searching for support, but no one looked at him. Everyone had seen the slap. Everyone knew the truth. Rex stepped closer, growling deeper now. His training was flawless. He never acted without command, yet he was ready to protect. Daniel knelt beside Eleanor for a moment, gently touching her cheek. "I'm here now," he whispered. She nodded, comforted just by his presence. When he stood again, something in the room shifted permanently. The fear that had silenced everyone moments ago now hung over the bully instead. Daniel's eyes locked with his. "You made a very big mistake." The bully swallowed hard, realizing too late that the situation had just flipped completely. Because this wasn't just an old woman anymore. This was a soldier's mother, and that soldier was ready to defend her. For a few seconds, the diner felt painfully silent. The bully stared at Daniel, trying to read him, trying to understand why the entire room suddenly seemed to shift its support away from him. He didn't know Daniel. He didn't know the uniform. He didn't know the years of discipline behind the calm expression. All he saw was another man standing between him and control, and bullies hate losing control. He straightened his shoulders, puffing his chest out again. "Look, Captain, or whatever," he grumbled, stepping closer. "Your mom was asking for it. Old people get confused, you know. She shouldn't have been talking smart." Daniel didn't move, didn't even blink. "She didn't talk smart," he replied. "She just existed, and you decided that was enough reason to hurt her." The bully scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, please, I just tapped her. You're making it sound like some big crime." Rex barked sharply, the sound slicing through the air. The bully jumped back a little, startled, before trying to cover it with a laugh. "Control your mutt," he said, but his voice wasn't as firm as before. Daniel's tone stayed low. "He's reacting to your aggression. Dogs like him don't bark unless they sense danger." The bully stepped forward again, pointing a finger at Daniel's chest. "You think that uniform scares me? You think you can just walk in here and act tough because you've got some dog and a badge?" Several customers gasped softly, waiting for Daniel to react. But he only stared at the finger inches from him. His expression didn't change. "You should step back," Daniel said quietly, "before you make things worse for yourself." The bully smirked. "Or what? You gonna arrest me? You're not a cop. You can't tell me what to do." Daniel's eyes glinted with a calm danger. "You're right, I'm not a cop, but I am a soldier, and that means I know exactly how to handle men who threaten the innocent." The bully hesitated, just for a second, just enough for everyone in the diner to notice the first crack in his confidence. His eyes darted toward Rex again, then toward Eleanor, then back at Daniel. Something about the captain's stillness, his absolute control, unsettled him. He tried to regain footing. "Listen, man. You weren't here. You didn't see how she—" "I saw the mark on her face," Daniel cut in sharply. "That's all I need to know." The bully's bravado flickered. For the first time since walking into the diner, he realized he might have picked a fight he couldn't win. Rex had been standing quietly beside Daniel, watching every movement in the room with trained precision. His ears twitched, his tail stiff, and his eyes locked onto the bully as if analyzing every breath he took. The tension in the diner thickened, and Rex felt it long before anyone else did. That was his job. Read danger, act fast, protect his handler. The moment the bully jabbed his finger at Daniel again, Rex stepped forward. Not lunging, not attacking, just one controlled, powerful step. But that single movement was enough to jolt the bully backward like he'd been shoved by an invisible force. His eyes widened as Rex let out a low, deep growl, the kind of sound that sent instinctive fear crawling through a person's spine. It wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it was a warning, a professional one. Customers gasped softly. Some covered their mouths. Others leaned in, unable to look away. For the first time since the confrontation began, the room felt a spark of confidence, because danger was no longer in the bully's favor. Rex positioned himself halfway between Daniel and the bully, lowering his head slightly, muscles tightened like coiled steel. His posture said everything. One more wrong move, and you'll regret it. Daniel placed a steady hand on Rex's back, not to restrain him, but to signal he was in control. "Easy, boy," he murmured. Rex responded instantly, the growl fading but his eyes never leaving the threat. The bully swallowed hard. He tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. What's he gonna do? Bite me for talking?" he muttered, stepping back again. His voice lacked the confidence he had moments earlier. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply stated a fact. Rex is trained to protect. He doesn't bite unless he sees danger. Right now, he paused, locking eyes with the bully. He sees you. Whispers spread among the customers, their fear slowly turning into a cautious hope. The bully glanced around, realizing the room that once cowered before him was now watching him crumble. Rex took another silent step forward, head high, stance firm. The message was clear. The bully wasn't in charge anymore, and for the first time, he felt it. This wasn't just a dog. This was a soldier, protecting another soldier. Something powerful changed the moment Daniel straightened his posture. His calm expression hardened into the focused look he wore during missions, controlled, sharp, unreadable. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to raise a hand. His presence alone shifted the energy in the diner, pulling control away from the bully like a tide changing direction. Daniel stepped forward, slow and steady. The bully stumbled slightly as he stepped back, surprised that the man he thought he could intimidate wasn't budging. Rex mirrored Daniel's movement perfectly, keeping pace with disciplined precision. Every person in the diner could feel the shift. Fear no longer sat in the room. Confidence did. "Here's what's going to happen," Daniel said, his voice calm yet firm. "You're going to step away from my mother. You're going to keep your hands where everyone can see them. And you're not going to make another move unless I tell you." The bully blinked. "Who do you think you are? Giving orders?" Daniel didn't break eye contact. A man trained to handle threats. And right now, you're acting like one. Whispers rippled through the room. People exchanged glances, some hopeful, some relieved. The young waiter exhaled slowly for the first time in minutes. Linda placed a hand over her chest, watching Daniel with gratitude growing in her eyes. The bully took a shaky breath, trying to rebuild the confidence slipping through his fingers. "I'm not scared of you," he muttered, but Daniel could see the truth in the way his hands twitched. "You don't have to be scared," Daniel replied. "You just have to follow instructions." The bully scoffed, though his voice cracked. "Or what? You gonna sick your dog on me?" Daniel shook his head. "Rex won't touch you unless you give him a reason." He paused, letting the words sink in. But I promise you this. You don't want to give him a reason." Rex let out a controlled, rumbling growl. The bully's eyes widened again. Daniel took another step, closing the gap between them. He wasn't angry. He wasn't emotional. He was focused, like he had walked into a situation he'd handled 100 times before. Because he had. This was no different than diffusing an unpredictable threat overseas. The bully wasn't special. He was just another man making dangerous choices. "You hurt a woman who did nothing to you," Daniel said quietly. "A widow, a grandmother, my mother, and you thought no one would stop you. That ends now." The bully's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His voice shrank. I didn't mean—" Daniel cut him off. "Intent doesn't erase damage. What matters is what happens next." The bully looked around for support, but every customer stared back with a newfound sense of courage. It finally hit him. The room wasn't afraid of him anymore. They were standing behind the captain. And Daniel wasn't just a soldier today. He was a son protecting his family. For a moment, the bully stood frozen, caught between fear and stubborn pride. His breathing quickened, his fists clenched and unclenched, and the anger on his face flickered, like a flame struggling to stay lit. Daniel watched him carefully, noticing something shift behind the man's aggressive posture. This wasn't just simple arrogance. There was something deeper, something damaged. "You don't understand," the bully muttered, his voice suddenly breaking its tough edge. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Then help me understand." The bully looked away, jaw tight. His confidence drained faster now, replaced by frustration that seemed to be eating him alive. The diner had fallen silent again, but this silence felt different, curious, less fearful. Everyone sensed they were about to hear what turned this man into the storm he was. "My old man," the bully began, swallowing hard. "He used to come at me for no reason. Yell, hit, break stuff. I couldn't stop him. Nobody ever stopped him." He paused, eyes darkening as old memories surfaced. "I learned early, if you don't strike first, someone else will. So I started hitting back before anyone could hurt me." Eleanor watched him through watery eyes, the pain on her cheek forgotten for a moment. She saw something familiar in him. Not cruelty, but a wounded child wearing a grown man's face. Daniel spoke softly, controlled. "That's a reason. But it's not an excuse." The bully clenched his jaw again, tears forming but refusing to fall. "I didn't mean to slap her that hard. He exhaled shakily. "I walk around angry all the time, at everyone, at everything. I don't know how to stop." Rex's posture softened slightly, reading the shift in the man's energy. Even the dog could sense the difference. This wasn't the same threat from minutes ago. This was someone breaking open. The customers exchanged glances. Some felt pity. Others struggled to forgive. But all of them began to understand. Monsters aren't always born. Sometimes they're made. Daniel's voice remained firm. "You were hurt. I get that. But hurting others won't heal you. It only makes you the same man you hated." The bully blinked, stunned by the truth in those words. "You can choose differently," Daniel continued, "but today you made the wrong choice, and you have to face the consequences." The bully looked down, shoulders sinking, tension leaking out of him like air from a deflating tire. For the first time, he looked less like a threat, and more like someone exhausted from fighting battles no one saw. But consequences were coming, whether he was ready or not. Daniel took a slow breath, grounding himself the way he had been trained to do in the field. A room full of shaken customers watched him, waiting to see how a soldier would respond to a man who had just hurt his mother. Some expected a fight, others feared one. But Daniel wasn't, driven by rage. He was driven by discipline, something the bully had never known. He stepped closer, stopping only when he was an arm's length away. The bully tensed, bracing as if expecting a punch. Instead, Daniel spoke calmly. "You're not my enemy," he said. "My mother may be hurt, but I don't solve problems with anger, not unless I'm left no choice." The bully's eyes darted around in confusion, as if the lack of violence unsettled him even more. Daniel continued, "You've lived your life swinging at shadows, but today you swung at the wrong person. Now, you have to face what you did." The bully swallowed hard. His earlier swagger was gone, replaced by uncertainty. "Look, I said I didn't mean to hurt her," he muttered. Daniel nodded once. "Intent matters, but consequences matter more." Rex sat at Daniel's side, posture alert but calm, like a silent warning that still hovered in the air. The entire diner seemed to lean in, breaths held. No one wanted to interrupt this moment of justice unfolding in front of them. Daniel reached gently for the bully's wrist, not jerking, not yanking, just a firm, controlled grip. "Turn around," he instructed. The bully hesitated. Are you arresting me?" "I'm detaining you," Daniel clarified. "The police will take it from here." The bully looked as though he wanted to resist, but exhaustion washed over his expression. The fight inside him had drained out completely. Slowly, he turned, letting Daniel guide his hands behind his back. Daniel secured them with a zip tie the young waiter handed him from the emergency drawer, something the diner kept for rare situations but never imagined would be used today. As Daniel tightened the restraint, the bully whispered, "I didn't think anyone would stop me." "Not really." Daniel's voice softened but remained steady. "Someone always should. And someone always can." The words hung heavy in the air, touching everyone who heard them. Eleanor watched her son with trembling hands pressed against her heart. She had feared he would lose control, feared he would act on anger, but instead he showed the very thing his father had always admired about him. His strength wasn't in his fists, it was in his character. Daniel guided the bully to a nearby chair. "Sit and wait for the authorities," he said firmly. The bully obeyed without a word. Customers began to breathe again. Some placed hands on their chests, others exchanged relieved looks. Linda wiped her tears openly now, grateful beyond words. Justice had entered the diner, not with violence, but with discipline, compassion, and undeniable strength. The diner felt strangely calm after Daniel restrained the bully, as if the room had finally taken its first full breath in minutes. The tension hadn't vanished completely, but it had shifted, no longer pressing down on the customers like a weight. Instead, it lingered only, around the man sitting with his hands tied behind his back, staring down at the floor. Outside, the sound of distant sirens grew louder. Linda had called the police moments earlier, her hands shaking as she explained what happened. Now, red and blue lights flashed through the diner windows, reflecting off the polished tables and stainless steel counter. Daniel stood beside Rex, watching the entrance. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't tense. He simply waited, steady as stone. His job here wasn't to punish, only to protect. The door swung open and 2 police officers stepped inside, scanning the room quickly. The older officer, Sergeant Miller, recognized Eleanor immediately. "Mrs. Parker," he asked, concern filling his voice. "Are you all right?" Eleanor nodded gently. "I am now," she whispered, glancing toward her son. Miller followed her gaze and spotted Daniel in uniform. "Captain Parker," he greeted, straightening slightly out of respect. "We got a call about an assault." Daniel motioned toward the restrained bully. "He struck my mother in front of everyone here. He became aggressive with multiple customers. I detained him safely until you arrived." The younger officer approached the bully, who didn't resist as he was lifted from the chair. His earlier fire was gone, replaced by a quiet resignation, perhaps even regret. "Sir, you're under arrest for assault," the officer said firmly. The bully didn't argue. He simply nodded and allowed himself to be escorted toward the door. Before stepping outside, he turned briefly toward Eleanor. Their eyes met for the smallest moment. Something soft flickered across his face, shame, maybe, understanding, but he said nothing as the officers led him away. The door closed behind them, muting the sirens. Inside, the diner slowly came back to life. Customers whispered, expressing relief, disbelief, and gratitude. Some approached Daniel to thank him. Others simply stared, still processing the shocking morning. Linda stepped forward with trembling lips. "Daniel." "Thank you," she said. "We were all so scared." Daniel offered a small nod. "You did the right thing, calling for help." The danger was gone now, but the emotional weight of what happened still hung in the air, especially for Eleanor. When the police car finally disappeared down the street, the diner settled into a fragile quiet. People returned to their tables, but their eyes remained on Eleanor and Daniel. Something tender, something heavy, lingered between them, something only a mother and son could understand. Daniel knelt beside his mother's booth, the same booth she had sat in every morning for years. His eyes softened, but the tension in his jaw hadn't fully gone away. "Mom," he said gently, "let me see your cheek." Eleanor hesitated, embarrassed. "Oh, sweetheart, it's nothing. I'm fine." Daniel shook his head. "Mom, you don't have to be strong for me. Not right now." Slowly, she lowered her hand, revealing the swelling and faint redness. Daniel's breath tightened. His fingers hovered inches from her face, careful not to touch the tender skin. The soldier in him felt rage, but the son in him felt heartbreak. "Why didn't you tell someone?" he asked quietly. "Why didn't you call for help when things got bad?" Eleanor's eyes glistened. "Because I didn't want to bother anyone. And I didn't think that man would actually hurt me. People get angry. I thought it would pass." Daniel exhaled through his nose, steadying himself. "Mom, you can't just sit through danger because you don't want to inconvenience someone. You matter. Your safety matters." A tear escaped her eye, rolling down her wrinkled cheek. "I know, Daniel, but I've lived alone for so long now. I don't want people thinking I'm helpless." Daniel placed his hand gently over hers. "Being safe isn't being helpless. It's being smart." Eleanor lowered her gaze. "I didn't want you to worry. You already deal with enough overseas. I never want to add to your burdens." His chest tightened. "Mom, you're never a burden. You're my family. You're the one person I would cross the world for." She covered her mouth as her tears spilled freely, her shoulders shaking. Daniel moved beside her and wrapped his arm around her carefully, holding her the way he used to after nightmares when he was a child. Only now, he was the one protecting her. "I'm sorry you had to go through this," Daniel whispered. "I wish I'd been here sooner." Eleanor shook her head quickly, leaning against him. "No, Daniel. You came at the perfect time. You saved me. You always have." Customers nearby wiped their eyes discreetly, touched by the moment. Even Rex, sensing the emotional shift, rested his head gently on Eleanor's lap. She smiled through tears and stroked his fur. "You scared that man half to death," she whispered to Rex, her voice trembling but warm. "Good boy." Rex wagged his tail softly. Daniel let out a small breath, relief finally settling over him. "Mom, from now on, if anything at all, feels wrong, you call me. I'll come home. I don't care where I am." She nodded slowly. "I will. I promise." For the first time since the terrible moment earlier, Eleanor felt safe again. Not because the bully was gone, but because her son was here. A soldier, a protector, and still, always, her little boy. The diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but something had shifted deep within everyone there. People weren't just relieved, they were changed. The sight of a quiet widow being hurt, and a son stepping in with dignity and strength, had touched something inside them that would not fade quickly. Eleanor took a slow sip of her now cold tea, the cup trembling only slightly in her hand. Daniel, sitting beside her, watched, protectively. He stayed close, unwilling to leave her side until he knew, truly knew, that she was all right. Rex lay at their feet, his head resting on her shoes like a guardian refusing to sleep. Linda approached with gentle steps and placed a fresh cup of tea on the table. "This one's on the house," she said softly. "And Mrs. Parker, we're all so sorry you went through that." Eleanor smiled faintly, still shaken but grateful. "Thank you, dear. It's all right now." But Linda shook her head. "No, it's not all right. Things like this shouldn't happen, and we shouldn't have been too scared to help you." She wasn't the only one who felt that way. Several customers gathered nearby, speaking softly but sincerely. "I should have stood up," one man admitted. "We all should have," said another. Daniel glanced at them, offering a steady nod. "Fear is real. I've seen it on battlefields, but courage isn't about never being scared. It's about choosing to do the right thing anyway." His words settled over the group like a warm blanket. For the first time since the chaos began, people didn't feel ashamed. They felt inspired. An elderly gentleman approached Daniel and extended a hand. "Son, thank you, not just for what you did today, but for reminding us of who we're supposed to be." Daniel shook his hand firmly. "Protecting others isn't just a soldier's job. It's everyone's responsibility." Eleanor looked up, her eyes shining with pride. "Your father would have said the same thing," she whispered. "He always believed kindness was the strongest thing a person could offer." Daniel smiled softly. "He taught me well." A warm silence settled between them, a silence filled with understanding, forgiveness, and love. Customers began placing gentle hands on Eleanor's shoulder, one by one, offering apologies, comfort, and promises. The town had always known her as the kind widow who never missed a morning at the diner. Now, she was something more, a reminder that even the quietest voices deserved to be protected. When Daniel finally helped her stand, the entire diner watched, not out of pity, but out of respect. Eleanor had survived more in life than most could imagine, and today she had shown strength not through fighting, but through enduring. As they walked toward the door, Rex close beside them, Daniel turned back for a moment. "Take care of each other," he said. People nodded, touched by the simplicity and power of his words. The bell above the door jingled softly as Daniel and Eleanor stepped outside, the morning light breaking through the clouds. And from that day on, the town remembered. Strength isn't measured by who you can hurt, but by who you choose to protect.